I hadn't seen my ranch in almost a year. After 12 months of deployment, I imagined the moment I'd finally roll up the long dirt road and breathe in that sweet, familiar smell of hay, soil, and freedom. My mind replayed every detail. The barn my dad and I built together, the mornings I'd sip coffee watching the sunrise over the fields, the sound of the horses' hooves echoing across the property. I smiled to myself, picturing the peace waiting for me at home. But the moment I crested the hill, my stomach dropped. What I saw didn't belong in the memories I'd carried overseas. The barn, my barn, the heart of this ranch, was gone. Splintered wood lay scattered across the ground, a twisted mess of metal and shattered boards. Dust hung in the air like a cloud of betrayal. My heart raced. I slammed the truck door and ran toward the wreckage. It wasn't just the destruction, it was the audacity. Right in the middle of the ruin, stapled to what used to be the door, was a bright HOA violation notice. I could barely make out the smug, bureaucratic font. Property destroyed due to code violations. Immediate compliance required. My blood ran cold. Code violations. I had built this barn with my own hands, following every rule to the letter, working weekends and late nights. How could anyone, anywhere, decide to destroy it without my knowledge? I sank to my knees, letting the pieces of wood slip through my fingers. Every splinter felt like a memory lost. I could see my father's face in every broken beam, hear his voice echoing in the hollow space. "You built something that lasts, son," he had said, and now it was gone. I stood and scanned the perimeter, and that's when I noticed them, the HOA inspectors. They were leaning against their SUVs, clipboards in hand, grinning like it was some kind of victory. I wanted to scream, to run at them, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. I had learned discipline in deployment. I knew rage alone wouldn't win this battle. I bent down, picking up a piece of wood, my hand shaking. My mind raced. This isn't just about a barn, it's about my home, my life, my family's legacy. I could feel the heat of determination rise in me. I'd fought for my country, endured hardship and fear, and now I would fight for my home. I started documenting the destruction, snapping photos with my phone, recording video as the inspectors muttered among themselves. Every angle captured the injustice. I spoke quietly to the camera, almost like a diary. This isn't just wood, this is history, this is my family. I felt tears welling, but I swallowed them down. This wasn't the time to break. I had a plan forming, but I needed information first. Then, as if the universe wanted to test me further, my phone rang. It was the HOA office. I answered, keeping my voice calm despite the fury clawing inside me. "Yes," I said. The woman on the other end didn't even pause before saying, "You have to remove the debris immediately or face fines. The property was unsafe." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Unsafe? You destroyed it. I followed every rule." My voice cracked, but I didn't let it falter. She didn't respond to the logic, only repeated the threat. Fines, fees, violations. Every word felt like a hammer driving into my skull. I hung up, staring at the ruin around me. The sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the splintered remains of my barn. The smell of sawdust, smoke, and rain-soaked earth filled my lungs. My hands were clenched into fists, and a single thought ran through my mind. They think they can intimidate me. They're about to find out just how wrong they are. I walked slowly around the site, letting the weight of the destruction sink in. Each beam, each broken nail, each shard of wood was a challenge. They had made the first move, but I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. Not here. And then I saw it. A small, overlooked corner of the property where the HOA inspectors hadn't dared to step. A legal loophole, an opportunity tiny, but enough to turn the tide. My lips curled into a determined smile. The fight had just begun. The next morning, I couldn't sleep. My eyes kept drifting to the window, imagining the barn in its prime and the HOA smugly patrolling the property. I replayed every moment from the previous day, the splintered wood, the inspector's grins, the bright violation notice mocking me. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA office. As soon as the call connected, I was met with that familiar, clipped tone, the kind of voice that makes you feel small even when you're standing tall. "HOA office, how can I help you?" "I need to speak to the board," I said, my voice steady, but carrying the undercurrent of anger I couldn't hide. A sigh, then a pause. "1 moment, please." Minutes passed. I could hear the faint tapping of keyboards, murmurs in the background, and then finally the voice of the HOA president, that smug, overconfident woman who somehow thought she had authority over my life. "Yes, this is the president. How can I help you?" Her tone was almost sweet, the kind of sweetness that hides sharp claws. I didn't waste time. I described the barn, the property, the months of work that went into it, and then dropped the hammer. "And now it's gone, destroyed by your inspectors." She paused, not because she was concerned, but because she clearly didn't expect a returned veteran to confront her directly. Then came the response I had anticipated. "It was a safety hazard, code violations. You should have complied with the prior notices." I laughed, a short, bitter laugh that made her pause again. "Safety hazard? I built that barn with my own hands. Every plank, every beam, every nail was up to code, and you destroyed it without even a warning." Her response was mechanical, almost rehearsed. "We followed protocol. You must remove the debris or face fines." I felt my hands clench around the phone. My anger flared, but I forced myself to breathe, to think, to strategize. I couldn't afford to lose control. Not now, not when this battle was just beginning. I hung up, packing back and forth across my living room. The air felt thick, suffocating, but I knew I had to channel this rage. My dad had taught me patience, strategy, and persistence, traits honed further during deployment. I started making a list: evidence, witnesses, neighbors who had seen the inspectors, records of permits, photographs of the barn's condition before and after. Every detail mattered. Every oversight by the HOA was ammunition. I walked outside, surveying the wreckage again. The sun hit the jagged remains, casting long, menacing shadows across the ground. I could almost hear the whispers of the HOA board, the smug satisfaction they must have felt. But I wasn't going to let them enjoy it. Humor crept in despite the tension. I imagined the inspectors, suited up like they were going to a gala, trying to demolish a barn. The image made me shake my head and smirk. "Did they bring a hammer or a feather?" I muttered to myself, but the laughter was short-lived. Reality reminded me this was serious. They had overstepped, and now the fight was mine to win. I spent the rest of the day knocking on neighbors' doors, quietly asking questions, gathering allies. Some were sympathetic but scared. Others, like Mr. Jenkins, a retired rancher, practically spit on the ground at the mention of the HOA. "They don't scare me," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "But they'll learn quickly that some of us don't back down." By evening, I had a folder bulging with evidence and notes, my mind spinning with strategies. I felt a spark of hope, tinged with adrenaline. The HOA might have taken the barn, but they hadn't taken my resolve. I was building a case, piece by piece, planning to turn their arrogance against them. As I stood on the porch, staring at the jagged remains of my barn silhouetted against the setting sun, I whispered to myself, "They think this is the end. They think they've won, but they've just lit the fuse." The shadows grew longer, the night air cooler, and I could feel the tension in every fiber of my body. Tomorrow the battle would escalate, and I would be ready. I knew I couldn't fight the HOA alone. They had power, money, and a boardroom full of people who thought they were untouchable. But I also knew something they didn't. I had the truth, the law on my side, and a community that quietly hated being bullied. The next morning, I climbed into my truck and drove to my neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, the retired rancher with a sharp tongue and an even sharper memory. He was out feeding his horses, and when I approached, he squinted at me suspiciously. "Back from deployment?" he asked, almost like he expected me to come with a complaint. "Yeah," I said, "and the HOA destroyed my barn." His eyes went wide. Then he laughed, a deep, rumbling laugh that carried across the field. "They did what? Those bureaucratic idiots? Son, you're not the first, and you sure as hell won't be the last." We went to his porch, and I pulled out my photos, my notes, everything I'd documented. He examined every piece, nodding slowly. "You've got them by the books," he said. "They didn't follow procedure, and you've got evidence. Now you just need to make them pay attention." I felt a surge of relief. Finally, an ally who understood the stakes. But I couldn't stop there. I needed someone with legal know-how, someone who could turn all this anger into action without me making a single misstep. I called my friend Carla, a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and wasn't afraid of HOA tyrants. Carla arrived in her beat-up SUV, a whirlwind of energy and confidence. "Let me see what we've got," she said, flipping through my evidence with laser focus. Her eyes widened as she examined the violation notice stapled to a piece of broken wood. "They have no case. They didn't notify you properly. They didn't follow protocol. And that destruction? Illegal, plain and simple." My heart started pounding. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was a war I could win. Humor found its way into the tension, even now. Carla shook her head and muttered, "Honestly, who thinks they can take down a barn built by a veteran and not face consequences? They should have stuck to making newsletters." I laughed, feeling some of the pressure ease, but the fire inside me didn't dim. Next, we planned. We would go door to door, quietly speaking to neighbors who had been quietly frustrated with the HOA. Some had experienced petty fines, others had been bullied over minor landscaping rules. Everyone had a story, and I needed those stories. I drove to 3 neighbors that afternoon, documenting their complaints, their frustrations, and their small acts of rebellion. Every note, every recording was another piece of the puzzle. By evening, my living room was transformed into a war room. Papers covered the table, photos pinned to walls, and my laptop full of digital evidence. Carla and I reviewed every document, marking loopholes, noting violations, and preparing our plan for confrontation. The stakes felt enormous, but I thrived on it. The barn was gone, yes, but my spirit was. I walked outside, staring at the ruin of my property, but now I didn't just see splintered wood, I saw strategy. I saw allies. I saw the potential to turn their arrogance against them. Every detail mattered. The order of the photos, the testimony of neighbors, the strict language in the HOA bylaws. Night fell and the ranch was quiet except for the wind rustling through the trees. I could feel the tension building like a storm ready to break. I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, we start hitting back. They've underestimated me and they're going to learn quickly." As I turned back to the house, I realized something important. This wasn't just about a barn anymore. It was about dignity, about standing up when everyone else expected me to back down. The fight was bigger than wood and nails. It was about respect, community, and making sure that bullies in power never feel untouchable. And in that moment, I promised myself something. I would not just rebuild the barn. I would make them rebuild their understanding of who they were dealing with. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling a mix of adrenaline and determination coursing through my veins. I couldn't afford to waste a single day. The HOA had taken my barn, but I was about to show them that I wasn't someone to be intimidated. Every detail, every misstep they had made would be used against them, and I intended to make them regret underestimating me. Carla and I spent hours going over the evidence, making sure every photo, email, and witness account was airtight. We highlighted the violations the HOA had committed, ignoring proper notification, failing to conduct inspections legally, and most importantly, destroying my property without authorization. It was a mountain of proof, and for the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. By mid-morning, we were ready for the first move. I drove back to the property, camera in hand, determined to document the debris, the damage, and the unmistakable evidence of the HOA's misconduct. Every broken beam, every nail sticking out of the splintered wood was a testament to their arrogance and overreach. I filmed it all, narrating in a controlled voice. This is not neglect. This is destruction, and they will answer for it. The tension built with each step I took across the wreckage. I felt eyes on me. Maybe the HOA had left someone to watch my actions, or maybe it was just my imagination. Either way, the adrenaline coursing through me sharpened my focus. This was the moment I would start turning the tide. Humor bubbled up as I thought of the absurdity of the situation. These people had suits and clipboards, probably thinking they were running a city council, and here I was, a deployed veteran, calmly taking photographs of their chaos. I whispered under my breath, "They're about to learn why veterans don't quit." After documenting everything, Carla and I prepared the legal notices. Every word was precise, every threat calculated. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. I made sure to include the clause we had found in the HOA's own bylaws, the loophole that could unravel their entire argument. It was small, technical, and they had overlooked it, the perfect weapon. By afternoon, the first strike was ready. Carla and I delivered the documents in person, watching the faces of the HOA board members as they read through the evidence and the legal references. I saw the first hints of panic. Their confident smirks faltered, and for a moment, I imagined they realized just how badly they had miscalculated. The room was tense, like a battlefield before the first shot. I stayed calm, letting Carla speak when necessary, and making sure every piece of evidence was clear and undeniable. I could feel the shift, the balance of power was moving. They weren't used to being challenged so directly, and their hesitation told me I had struck at the right moment. Even so, I knew better than to let my guard down. The HOA had money, influence, and pride. They could escalate, delay, or try to intimidate me further. I needed to stay vigilant, document everything, and anticipate every move they might make. This was a chess game, and I had just captured my first piece. By the time I left the meeting, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across my property. I stood for a moment, looking at the wreckage again. For the first time in days, I felt something close to satisfaction. They had made the first move, thinking they could crush me, and now the tables had turned. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The HOA would regroup, strategize, and try to find a way to regain control. I needed to be ready, sharper, and smarter than they could ever anticipate. Every neighbor I had spoken to, every document I had prepared, every bit of evidence I had collected would become part of the arsenal I was building. As I walked back to the house, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees and across the open fields. I whispered to myself, a mixture of determination and quiet triumph. They think they can intimidate me. They're about to learn that they just woke the wrong person. This barn, my home, my legacy, no one touches it without consequences. That night I stayed up late, reviewing the documents once more. The fight was far from over, but for the first time I felt confident. The first strike had been made, the first warning delivered, and from here every move I made would be deliberate, precise, and unstoppable. I knew the next step had to be face-to-face. Phone calls, letters, and emails could only do so much. The real confrontation was inevitable, and it was going to be in the HOA boardroom. I arrived early, truck parked just outside the modest office building, heart hammering, mind sharp. Every instinct told me to stay calm, measured, and ready for anything. When I walked in, the room smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner, a sharp contrast to the open air of my ranch. The board members were already there, seated in stiff chairs behind a polished oak table, their smug expressions practically dripping with condescension. The president, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a clipped tone, glanced at me as if I were a minor inconvenience. I didn't flinch. I laid my folder on the table and opened it, flipping it to the first page of evidence. Every photograph, every email, every document was meticulously organized. My voice, steady but firm, filled the room. This is what your inspectors left behind. This is what you destroyed. And this, I pointed to the violation notice stapled to the broken door frame, is how you justify it. There was a brief, awkward silence. I could feel the tension thick in the air. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding my gaze. The president opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. Please let me finish. I think it's important that everyone understands the full picture before we proceed. I walked them through every violation, every misstep. I explained the procedures they had ignored, the legal requirements they had trampled, and the impact their actions had on my family, my ranch, and my livelihood. The room grew quieter with every word. You could almost feel the arrogance draining out of them, replaced with unease. Humor crept in, even in the tension. I caught the president fumbling with her pen, dropping it twice, and I couldn't help but smirk slightly. You might want to pick up that pen, it's about to write some apologies, I muttered under my breath. It was a small victory, but it reminded me that confidence was as important as facts. One by one, neighbors I had quietly spoken to over the past weeks stepped forward, sharing their own stories of intimidation, fines, and arbitrary enforcement by the HOA. Their voices, once hesitant, grew stronger as they recounted incidents that mirrored my own. I could see the board members squirming. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who had the facts, witnesses, and law on their side. Carla spoke next, calm and precise. She referenced the exact clause in the HOA bylaws that they had overlooked, the loophole that made their destruction of my barn illegal. She laid it out clearly, without emotion, leaving no room for interpretation. The room went quiet again, the air almost vibrating with the weight of our argument. I could see it, the president's face, pale and tight, trying to maintain composure. Others were avoiding eye contact entirely, shuffling papers nervously. For the first time, they looked like they weren't in control, and that in itself was a victory. I concluded by looking each board member in the eye. I came back from deployment ready to protect what matters. My barn, my home, my family's legacy, none of this can be taken without consequences. I'm not here to argue for my own satisfaction. I'm here to ensure justice, accountability, and that this never happens again. Silence filled the room. You could hear a pin drop. And then slowly, one by one, the board members started to murmur among themselves, realizing the weight of what had just been laid out. The president finally spoke, her tone brittle. We'll review this. I didn't let up. I stayed composed, reminding them that their next steps would be documented and that any misstep could escalate the consequences. The tension was almost unbearable, but it was mine to control. I had walked into this room prepared, armed with facts, allies, and unwavering resolve. As I walked out, my folder under my arm, I felt a surge of quiet triumph. This was the first time I had seen them truly uncertain, unsure of how to respond. They had underestimated me, underestimated my planning, and underestimated the support I had rallied. Outside, the wind hit my face, carrying with it the scent of hay and the open fields I had fought to protect. I whispered under my breath, "They think this is the end. It's only the beginning. The fight is far from over, but I've already won the first round." The morning after the showdown meeting, I woke up with a mix of anticipation and tension. The HOA had been forced into silence, but I knew better than to trust their hesitation. Behind those stiff smiles and clipped words, they were already scheming, plotting, trying to find a way to regain control. I had to strike while their confidence was shaken, while the doubt I had planted was still raw. Carla and I met early at my ranch, papers and laptops sprawled across the kitchen table. We went over every document, every photo, every statement from neighbors. The loophole we had discovered in the HOA bylaws wasn't just technical, it was a legal weapon sharp enough to cut through their arrogance and force them to rebuild the barn. My stomach tightened as Carla explained our next move. "We file this formally. They don't comply. They face fines, legal action, and public accountability. They won't see it coming." By mid-morning, we delivered the legal notice. I remember walking up to the HOA office, feeling a strange combination of adrenaline and calm. The weight of every misstep, every broken plank of wood, every injustice we had documented pressed down on me, but it was a weight I carried with resolve. I handed the notice directly to the receptionist and watched as it made its way to the board president. Minutes later, I could feel the storm brewing. Carla called to confirm the board had received it. "They're reading it now," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "I can already hear the panic." I imagined the scene. The president, normally so composed, reading line after line of violations, evidence, and bylaws they had ignored. Her face must have turned pale. Her smug smirk, the one that had haunted me for weeks, was probably gone by now. I couldn't help a wry smile. Humor had become my shield in this battle, even amidst the tension. I muttered under my breath, bet she didn't think she'd be getting a crash course in legal accountability today. But the situation was serious. This was no longer just about a barn. It was about sending a message that abuse of power had consequences, that no one, not even a supposedly untouchable HOA, could ignore the law. Every neighbor who had supported me, every detail documented, and every ounce of patience I had learned during deployment was coming into play now. By afternoon, word began to spread. A few neighbors saw the president packing, phone pressed to her ear, a look of panic etched on her face. I walked past, nodding politely, letting the message sink in. I didn't need to shout. The point had been made. Then came the call from Carla, her tone barely containing excitement. "They're discussing compliance. They're afraid of the fines, afraid of legal escalation, and they know they're in the wrong. This is it. We have leverage." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Every bit of preparation, every late night organizing evidence, every conversation with allies, it had led to this moment. I felt a surge of vindication, but I also stayed vigilant. The HOA wasn't completely defeated yet. They could try to delay, make excuses, or attempt another underhanded move. I had to be ready for anything. As evening approached, I stood on the edge of my property, looking at the remains of the barn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and earth. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the ground, mirroring the tension that still lingered in the battle ahead. I whispered under my breath, a mix of determination and quiet triumph. They thought they could intimidate me, take what's mine, and walk away. They thought wrong. Every move I've made has cornered them, and they're going to rebuild. Every splintered board, every ruined nail, every memory they tried to erase, they're going to pay to fix it. That night, I sat in my living room, folder open, reviewing every step we had taken. I could feel the weight of justice pressing forward, unstoppable. The first strike had been made. The HOA had underestimated me. And now, with the legal trap set and the pressure mounting, I knew one thing: this fight wasn't just about reclaiming my barn anymore. It was about proving that arrogance and abuse of power could be defeated, and that standing up for yourself was never a waste of energy. Tomorrow, the next stage would begin. Overseeing the rebuilding, ensuring the HOA followed through, and finally restoring not just the barn, but my home, my pride, and my family's legacy. And I would make sure they didn't forget it. The morning the construction crew arrived, I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with hope. After months of frustration, anger, and sleepless nights, the first tangible step toward reclaiming my ranch was finally underway. The sun was just peeking over the hills, casting golden light across the fields, illuminating the ruins of what had once been my barn. I watched as the crew unloaded lumber, metal beams, and tools. Every plank they carried felt like a small victory. I directed them carefully, making sure the rebuilding matched the original design I and my father had painstakingly constructed. Every detail mattered. I couldn't allow the HOA's destruction to define the barn's story. I was determined to restore it stronger and better than before. Neighbors started to show up, quietly at first. Some brought coffee, some sandwiches, others simply came to offer moral support. Mr. Jenkins leaned on his fence, arms crossed, watching with a smirk. "They're gonna regret this," he said. I nodded, silently grateful. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about community, pride, and standing together against those who thought they could bully people into submission. The HOA tried to assert themselves even during the rebuild. A representative showed up, clipboard in hand, awkwardly hovering near the construction site. I could see the discomfort on their face as they realized they had no authority here, no leverage. Humor crept in despite the tension. I muttered under my breath, "Even their presence can't ruin what they already destroyed." As the walls went up, memories flooded me, mornings spent with my father hammering boards, nights working by lantern light, the first time I walked through the barn and felt pride swell in my chest. Each nail driven into place felt like reclaiming not just wood and metal, but a piece of my life the HOA had tried to steal. By afternoon, the barn was beginning to take shape. The skeleton of the building rose proudly against the sky, a testament to resilience. I moved through the site, hands-on, directing where beams should go, double-checking measurements. Carla stayed close, documenting progress and ensuring the HOA complied with every legal requirement. Every detail we had fought for was being honored, and the board knew it. The tension escalated when the HOA president called, her voice tight and defensive. "We expect compliance with our guidelines during construction," she said. I smiled, letting the silence linger before replying. "I appreciate your concern, but every step follows code and law. You'll see the results soon enough." She sputtered, caught off guard by my calm assertiveness. I hung up, feeling a wave of triumph. Their panic was tangible, even from a distance. By evening, the barn was partially framed, and I stood back, surveying the progress. The crew had done an incredible job, neighbors had pitched in, and the ruin of yesterday was slowly transforming into the pride of today. I ran my hand along a freshly nailed beam, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in weeks. Even so, vigilance remained. I noticed corners the crew had initially cut, small shortcuts that could have caused problems later. I called them over, rechecking every detail, ensuring that nothing the HOA had done could compromise the rebuild. Every action I took sent a silent message. Shortcuts, arrogance, and carelessness would not be tolerated, not here, not now. Night fell and the ranch was quiet again, except for the soft hum of generators and the occasional creak of wood settling. I stood alone for a moment, looking at the barn in the moonlight. The shadows of the night stretched across the land, long and ominous, but this time they didn't frighten me. They reminded me of everything I had fought for: the fight, the planning, the allies, the justice. I whispered quietly, almost to myself, "This barn, it's ours again, stronger, safer, untouchable." I knew the HOA was watching, waiting for me to falter. But I had learned too much, planned too carefully, and fought too hard to let them manipulate this victory. Every plank nailed, every beam raised, every neighbor supporting me was a reminder that their arrogance had no place here. As I walked back to the house, tired but determined, I realized something profound. The barn wasn't just rebuilt. It was proof that resilience, community, and standing up for what's right could triumph over intimidation. And soon, the HOA would finally understand that some battles, once fought, cannot be ignored or forgotten. The morning light spilled across my ranch, illuminating the barn in its full glory for the first time since its destruction. Standing there, I felt a wave of relief and pride unlike anything I had experienced in months. The wood gleamed, beams perfectly aligned, doors swinging smoothly, every inch a testament to resilience, determination, and justice. Neighbors trickled in, carrying coffee, muffins, and congratulations. Mr. Jenkins leaned on his fence, smirking proudly. "Told you they'd regret underestimating you," he said. I laughed, feeling the tension of the past weeks start to melt away. This barn wasn't just rebuilt, it was stronger, safer, and more meaningful than ever. The HOA, of course, didn't vanish quietly. The president and her board were forced to comply fully with the legal ruling. They paid fines, sent formal apologies, and even had to cover part of the rebuild costs. I watched as they arrived, stiff and uncomfortable, their usual arrogance stripped away. Humor snuck into the moment as the president awkwardly tried to explain her presence. We just wanted to ensure compliance," she muttered, clutching her clipboard. I shook my head, smiling. "Compliance isn't a favor, it's the law." Every interaction reminded me that this victory wasn't just for me. It was for the neighbors, the veterans, the quiet people bullied by bureaucracy. People who had been intimidated, ignored, or silenced by those in power could see that standing firm, documenting every move, and refusing to back down could lead to justice. I walked inside the barn for the first time since it had been destroyed. The scent of fresh wood and sawdust filled my lungs, and I ran my hands over the beams, remembering the nights spent with my father, the early mornings, the hours of sweat and determination. I whispered softly, "We did it, Dad. We really did it." Even the little things brought satisfaction. A nail perfectly hammered, a beam straight and strong, the doors fitting snugly in their frames. Each detail was a small victory, a mark of precision and care that the HOA could never undo. It wasn't just about rebuilding wood and metal. It was about restoring dignity, memories, and a sense of control over what they had tried to take from me. Neighbors stayed late into the day, helping clean up debris, arranging tools, and sharing stories of their own small victories. I realized that what had begun as a personal fight had grown into a community movement. People were inspired, encouraged to stand up for themselves and to support one another. Laughter filled the air, contrasting sharply with the tension that had dominated the past weeks. The HOA president finally left, her head low, her posture stiff. I didn't gloat, didn't mock. The victory spoke for itself. The barn stood towering and intact, an unmistakable symbol of resilience. That was enough. The lesson was clear: arrogance, bullying, and overreach might seem powerful, but preparation, perseverance, and unity could overcome them. As evening fell, I sat on the porch, staring at the barn silhouetted against the orange sky. My body ached, my hands were calloused, but my heart was full. The barn wasn't just a building anymore. It was a monument to determination, justice, and the refusal to be intimidated. I thought about deployment, about the challenges I had faced overseas, and realized that some of the hardest battles were fought at home, in silence against forces that seemed invisible until they directly touched you. I hung a small, subtle sign above the door: protected, rebuilt, untouchable. Not to mock, not to gloat, but as a reminder to myself, my neighbors, and anyone who thought they could overstep, that respect and justice could not be ignored. Finally, I sat back, watching the sun dip below the hills, feeling a deep sense of closure. The fight had been long, grueling, and stressful, but it was worth every ounce of effort. I had returned from deployment to a barn in ruins, but I had reclaimed it, rebuilt it, and in the process, strengthened my community and my own resolve. I whispered quietly, more to myself than anyone else. They thought they could destroy more than wood. They didn't realize what it takes to break a person who's fought for their life, their home, and their principles. This is more than a barn. This is proof that some battles are worth every second. The barn stood proud, the ranch felt whole again, and for the first time in months I allowed myself to breathe. Knowing that victory was real, justice was served, and no one could take that away. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.